If you live in the Midwest or the northern US, you may have heard an old farmer tell you to plant your corn when oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear, and that field corn should be knee high by the 4th of July. If you're in the southern US, you may have been told that when the mesquite trees leaf out, the last frost has passed and it's safe to plant those warm season crops like tomatoes and squash. Many of these traditional old wives' tales or farmers' wisdoms about planting and gardening are actually based on phenology. That is the study of seasonal changes in plants and animals in relation to climate and weather. Many traditional planting rules are based on biological indicators when certain plants leaf out or bloom, or when specific animals become active. These signals reflect cumulative temperature trends and can help predict when conditions are right for planting, pruning, or harvesting. Today on Just Grow Something, we'll do a breakdown of some of those common gardening wisdoms across different regions, why they work, and how they can help gardeners time their planting based on natural cues. We'll even check out some of the wisdoms from a few regions outside the US, namely Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, to see how they compare. Let's dig in. Hey, I'm Karen, and what started as a small backyard garden 20 years ago turned into a lifelong passion for growing food. Now, as a market farmer and horticulturist, I want to help you do the same. On this podcast, I am your friend in the garden, teaching evidence-based techniques to help you grow your favorites and build confidence in your own garden space. So grab your garden journal and a cup of coffee and get ready to just grow something. So, this episode was actually by request from Suzanne Bennett in the Just Grow Something Gardening Friends Facebook group. So, thank you, Suzanne, for the suggestion, and other members for chiming in, seconding that this would be an interesting episode. I can say that there are quite a few here that I have heard, much of it having to do more with like commercial row cropping, but I've picked a few from each region that tend to apply across the board. If you hear your area and I get this completely wrong, call me out, okay? Tell me that it's not correct. It took a while to dig up the correct phenological answers for a lot of these, or to even find the wisdoms for some regions. So leave me a comment if I get one wrong, or if there's one that you've heard that I don't cover in this episode. So we'll start with the Midwest and the northern US, and that first one is plant corn when oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear. So this works because oak trees leaf out in response to soil temperature, not just air temperature. Corn germinates best when the soil temperatures are above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which often coincides with the appearance of the very small oak leaves. So this avoids us planting too early when the cold soils could cause poor germination or seed rot in our corn. That second one, knee high by the 4th of July, talking about when corn grows or how it's grown, essentially corn that is planted at the optimal time. And let's be honest, right now we're talking about dent corn or field corn, so the dry corn. So for us home growers, this might be the decorative corn or popcorn, okay? If we're planting that at the optimal time in late April to early May, then that corn should reach about knee high or 2.5 to 3 feet by the 4th of July. And that means it's on track for a full season before the frost hits. If it's shorter, it may have planted too late, or it may have suffered from some poor weather, or it may have lacked nutrients. This next one is typically from like the upper Midwest and the Northeast areas, and that is to wait until the lilacs leaf out to plant tender crops. So lilacs typically leaf out when consistent temperatures are finally there and in the garden and the frost risk has usually passed. So this kind of helps to figure out when you can plant like tomatoes and peppers and other frost sensitive crops without risking cold damage. Now, for me, in this area, that would be a little bit early for my tomatoes and my peppers because I really like to make sure that that soil temperature has gotten really warm. But if all you're worried about is frost risk, then generally speaking, if you wait until the lilacs start to have their leaves, you should be okay. Another one is to plant potatoes when dandelions bloom. So this, particularly in the northern US area and up into Canada. So dandelions bloom when soil temperatures reach around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is the ideal temperature for potato tuber development. This is going to make sure that your tubers don't rot in a cold, wet soil by planting them too early. So if we move into the southern US, we have when mesquite trees leaf out, the last frost has passed. This is particularly in areas like Texas and the Southwest. Mesquite trees are highly sensitive to soil and air temperatures, and they will only leaf out when the chance of frost is extremely low. So this is usually used by, farmers and ranchers as a reliable indicator to plant warm season crops. So this might be tomatoes or squash or beans. Speaking of beans, in the southeastern US, it could be plant beans when pecan trees start to bud. So, pecan trees are really slow to wake up and they will only bud when temperatures are consistently warm. So, this is going to signal that the soil is warm enough for beans to germinate properly. And yes, I said pecan. Don't come at me with that pecan stuff, okay? It's a pecan. I'm just saying. I'll start a war with you right now. Another one in the southeastern US would be when the dogwoods bloom, it's time to plant corn, and that means it's time to put out those warm season crops. So dogwood trees bloom when daytime temperatures are consistently warm. Usually this is around mid-spring, and so of course this is going to coincide with the optimal planting conditions for things like corn and tomatoes and peppers. Now we get into like the northeastern US and New England. Some of those are sow peas when daffodils bloom. So daffodils bloom when soil temperatures reach around 45 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that is perfect for cool season crops like your peas and your lettuce and your spinach. So this keeps us from planting them too early when the soil is really, really cold and wet, or waiting until it's too late and it's too warm for a lot of those crops. Another one for like New England and also up into Canada would be when maple trees start to leaf out, it's safe to plant carrots and beets. This kind of works out in the same way. The timing of when maples leaf out coincides with when the soil has warmed up enough for root crop seeds to germinate. So again, this is going to help us planting in soil that is too cold and avoid that slow germination from the cold soil. If we get into the Pacific Northwest and the West Coast, when apple trees bloom, it's time to start those warm season crops. So apple blossoms open when average temperatures reach around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. We're talking air temperatures here now. So that is signaling that it's warm enough for tomatoes or peppers or squashes to go in the ground. And this is going to help us avoid the risk of a late frost. Another one would be to plant lettuce and greens when the forsythia blooms. And, forsythia blooms in the early spring, usually when the air temperatures are around 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So this would be a good time for cool weather crops in more milder climates to be able to plant like things like lettuce and spinach and kale. And then there are some things that are just kind of, general North American or even worldwide sort of gardening wisdoms. One of those is to plant by the moon cycles. Now, this has not been scientifically proven, but there are a lot of farmers and gardeners who believe that the gravitational pull of the moon affects soil moisture. So the idea behind this is the waxing moon, right? So when it's in that new to full stage, is best for planting above ground crops like tomatoes and lettuces. The waning moon, so your full moon to the new moon, that is best for planting root crops like potatoes and carrots. So again, this is, anecdotal, but what we're really looking at is like, okay, plant during consistent warm temperatures and proper soil moisture. That's what really matters. However you can figure that out is great. Another one of these wisdoms is, if you have 3 consecutive 50-degree Fahrenheit nights, that means that it's safe to plant warm season crops. Okay, this is used really broadly and it's used more in like temperate climates. And yes, if you have your warm season crops like tomatoes and peppers, they really need soil temperatures that are above 55 degrees Fahrenheit for really good root growth. So If your nighttime temperatures are staying at or above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, then yeah, your soil has likely warmed enough to start supporting those tender plants. But that doesn't mean that, okay, 3 consecutive nights and all of a sudden it's safe, because I can tell you, we have had 3 consecutive nights of 50 degrees Fahrenheit weather here in West Central Missouri recently. And we're actually technically in a blizzard warning right now. So, seriously, some of these things just don't make sense. Another one would be, if the oak trees are full of acorns, expect a harsh winter. This one probably doesn't work, okay? Oak trees are going to produce varying acorn amounts based on the seasonal conditions. And so I get it, high acorn production, thinking that you're going to predict winter weather with that. If you have high acorn production, it's usually linked to drought stress or prior seasonal conditions, not necessarily predicting winter weather. So this one might be fun, but I don't think acorn production is a very reliable predictor of how, severe your winter is going to be. Planter Box Direct has some exciting news to share. They've got a new shape and a new look. Now, not only can you get my favorite planters in square, rectangular, tiered, and stand versions, you've got a hexagonal option too. And on top of the 21 color choices they already offered, they've added rough cedar gray as a wood grain option on all shapes of their USA-made steel planters. Get your own long-lasting, beautiful planter boxes by going to planterboxdirect.com and using code JUSTGROW10 at checkout to save 10% and get free shipping. They're the planters I use in my own gardens, and now you can have them in yours in whatever color and shape combo you like. Use code JUSTGROW10 for 10% off and free shipping at planterboxdirect.com. So there are a lot of fascinating planting wisdoms also from other countries that we here in the US might listen to. So here's a few examples that I found from Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, along with the science behind why they work. Again, this took some digging. So if any of what I say is inaccurate according to where you live, please tell me. And if you have some common ones that I missed, please comment and let me know that too. This first one was from Australia, in the more temperate and kind of Mediterranean climates in Australia, and it's sow pumpkins after the first big spring rain. So in much of Australia, particularly the southern states, the first significant spring rain pretty much signals the end of the really cold nights and an increase in the soil moisture, which would make it perfect for like warm season crops like pumpkins and squash and cucumbers. So, if you're planting after a good rain, this is also going to help reduce transplant shock, and that's going to help get those plants off to a strong start. So I could see how this would work. This one is more from more southern Australia. When the wattles bloom, spring is on the way. Now, wattle trees are an acacia species, and they bloom in the late winter to the early spring. So that is going to mark a little bit of a seasonal shift. So a lot of gardeners are going to use this as a cue to start those warm season crops indoors, or maybe to start preparing their garden beds. I can get behind that one. Another one from Australia: never prune stone fruit trees in winter, only in summer. So pruning fruit trees, stone fruit trees, so we're talking things like peaches and nectarines and plums, in the winter time in Australia is actually going to increase the risk of fungal diseases, particularly peach leaf curl and dieback in the very humid regions. So if you're doing it in the summer after the leaves have fully leafed out, it's going to reduce the disease risk and help direct energy into fruit production. This is completely different than what we do here in the Midwest. Pruning is generally best done in the late winter or in the early spring. So this is, advice that I was not familiar with and really had to kind of dig into. So if this is something that you have heard and you have practiced this, let me know. If I'm completely wrong, let me know. But this was kind of the information that I dug up. Now, if we jump over to New Zealand, we have some things that I'm going to have a hard time pronouncing. Okay, the first one is sow peas when the cowhide blooms. Okay, so this is the cowhide tree, which is a Sephora species. They generally bloom in the early spring, and so this is going to signal that the soil temperatures should be warm enough for pea seeds to germinate. Once again, this is going to avoid sowing it too early, and that wet soil, could absolutely cause slow germination or rotting seeds. So wait until the cowhide. And I hope that I'm pronouncing that right. Cowhide tree. Another one for, I guess, both New Zealand and Australia would be to plant garlic on the shortest day, harvest on the longest day. That works here also, although we kind of tend to, shift that a little bit based on our frosts. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, the shortest day of the year is usually around June 21st, and that marks the ideal time to plant garlic because you need that cold exposure to form proper bulbs. And then you're going to want to harvest on the longest day, which is around December 21st. And that aligns usually with the garlic maturing as the days are getting hotter and drier, and that helps to cure the bulbs properly for storage. The exact same thing works here in the northern hemisphere, but we're just swapping those dates. So we're planting around December 21st and we're harvesting around June 21st. Now, depending on where you are, and this could be both northern and southern hemisphere. It's going to depend on your soil conditions at the time that the longest day of the year comes around. So oftentimes you might be, December 21st, your ground might be frozen solid. So if you have to plant it earlier than that, then there's no harm, no foul on that. So you should be planting around the time that it works best for your soil conditions. So that wisdom of plant on the shortest day and harvest on the longest day, it makes sense until it doesn't, right? So the next one is from coastal New Zealand, and I'm really hoping that I'm going to pronounce this correctly. If oh gosh, okay, let me do this again. Pohutukawa. I really hope I'm doing this right. If Pohutukawa flowers bloom early, expect a hot, dry summer. All the New Zealanders are laughing at me right now. The Pohutukawa tree. Okay, this is a Metrosideros excelsa. That's the Latin name for it. It is known as New Zealand's Christmas tree, and so it flowers in the early summer. And so some people believe that if you've got an early bloom, so late spring instead of the early summer, then that means that warmer conditions are coming sooner, which could indicate a longer, drier summer. So this is classic phenology. The plant is responding to climatic cues, and that also may impact your seasonal weather. So, okay, somebody from New Zealand, please tell me if I pronounced that properly. That was a heck of a Pohutukawa. I think that's what it is. All right. I'm usually pretty good at this. And then if we move over to the UK, we look at Great Britain or UK and Ireland, plant potatoes when the blackthorn blossoms. So blackthorn is a Prunus spinosa. They flower in the early to mid-spring, which is around March to April. This is going to coincide with the time when soil temperatures generally reach around 45 degrees Fahrenheit or 7 Celsius, and that is the minimum needed for potatoes to sprout. So this is a good sign. It helps us to avoid the planting too early. We don't want those tubers to rot in the cold, wet soil, so we wait until the blackthorn flowers. Perfect. Another one would be sow carrots when the ash trees bud. So ash trees bud a little bit later than a lot of other trees, usually not until the spring temperatures like to start to stabilize. So that generally means that the soil is warm enough for carrot seeds to germinate quickly. We all know carrots are divas. They can take like 3 weeks to sprout sometimes. So if we can get them to sprout faster, this is going to reduce the risk of slow, weak germination in a soil that is maybe too cold. And if that happens, then we get forked or stunted carrots. So if we wait until the ash trees have budded out, then it should be warm enough for those carrot seeds to germinate quickly. Another one involving ash is if oak before ash, we're in for a splash. If ash before oak, we're in for a soak. So this is basically suggesting that if the oak trees leaf out before the ash trees, then it will be a drier summer. But if the ash trees leaf out first, then we're expecting a wet summer. So, I mean, this works because we already talked about the ash trees budding out later than many of the other trees, but oak trees tend to respond to temperature, while ash trees tend to be more sensitive to soil moisture. So if you have a warm, dry spring, that is going to encourage the oaks to leaf out early. But if you have a wet spring, that's going to slow those oaks down and it's going to let those ash trees emerge first. I mean, this isn't perfect, but it is a good example of how trees respond to climatic changes. So this one's maybe 50-50. I don't know about this one. And then finally, we have plant beans when the hawthorn blooms. So, hawthorn is also known as Mayflower, and it generally blooms in, wait for it, May, right? So, this is signaling that the conditions are warm enough for beans. Beans need soil temperatures that are generally above 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 Celsius, and that usually aligns with hawthorn flowering. Okay, so no matter where you are in the world, there is going to be some local folklore about how and when to plant certain things based on the activities of other plants or even animals. We didn't even get into the whole animal kingdom thing, right? This wisdom is often passed down through generations. The timing of these things is not based on a calendar. So even as our climate shifts warmer or cooler in certain areas, these indicators are going to remain the same. So modern weather forecasts can help us to plan, but nature's signals are going to actually remain one of the best guides for gardeners. By using phenology, which is watching the timing of the plant and the animal activity, we can actually get region specific planting cues based on actual weather patterns rather than dates on a calendar or forecasts from weather gurus. We just have to be able to decipher which is actually accurate and which isn't. So the next time you see oak leaves emerging or forsythia blooming, take note. It might just be time to start planting. Thanks again to Suzanne for suggesting this topic. If you have a topic you'd like me to cover, reach out to me through socials or in the comments of an episode or through email from my website, justgrowsomething.com. I would love to hear it. Until next time, my gardening friends, keep on cultivating that dream garden, and we'll talk again soon.